All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Lars, for joining the podcast today. I would like to welcome you warmly to our podcast. Dr. Lars Kissau, the president of the Net Zero Accelerator at BASF, which focuses on renewable energy, circular economy, and reducing CO2 emissions. So maybe to start with would be great if you can just open up a bit more about the Net Zero Accelerator and the objectives of the program.
Sure. So thank you, Christina. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very happy to share more about what I do, since it's really something I am very passionate about. So the Net Zero Accelerator program that I've been running for the past 3 years in BASF aims to transform the company to net zero, to put it in very simple terms. So for a large chemical company like BASF, this means transforming the energy base that we use from fossil to renewables, and also transforming the raw material base from fossil again to renewables or recycled raw materials, as well as finding ways of reducing the CO2 emissions from our current production. And this is basically the scope of what we do in the program. We develop and execute projects that are aimed at those targets.
Great, great. I think last time we also touched a bit more while preparing for this podcast, a bit more on the history of BASF, how it was evolving the reporting of CO2. Can you open up a bit more on that as well?
Sure. So basically, BASF started reporting or measuring and reporting CO2 emissions from its production plants and sites in 1990. And basically since then, the CO2 emissions have been part of our annual reporting. And we basically have been reducing our emissions since then continuously, primarily through a focus on efficiency, because a lot of the CO2 emissions come from the energy production. So having more efficient energy production, having more efficient production processes results also in a saving of CO2. So it's a very strong economic incentive just to simply reduce emissions, which is somehow a waste. So that has been the approach to emissions, and in parallel, the overall approach to sustainability evolved also from basically, I would say, complying with regulations to seeing sustainability as something that's differentiating in the eyes of a customer. So for us now, it's not simply a complying with regulations, it's a way to try and offer our customers products that are differentiated, that are more sustainable. And we actually try to drive our portfolio towards more sustainable products by classifying our products in different categories and really then looking to promote these products that are more sustainable, that are even accelerating sustainability on the customer side.
Great. It's very great to hear that you mentioned the customers, of course, because there is always a challenge with the green premium, for example, and understanding how willingness to pay for the more sustainable that sometimes translates to more higher costs, for example. Can you give an example, for example, how BASF collaborated with the customers to develop maybe lower emission products and solutions, and what can be some of and have you had those examples where the customer specifically demanded for more sustainable solutions from you?
Yeah, there are some very nice examples actually in the recent past. I mean, overall, I would say the share of customers that are looking for more sustainable products is increasing steadily. And the willingness or ability to pay is also increasing. I mean, it really, in the end, boils down to, as the end consumer, what we are prepared to buy, to pay for. If we are buying a car and it's offered as in a slightly more sustainable way, but as an end consumer, we refuse to pay a little bit more. This, of course, trickles back in the whole value chain. So overall, we see an increasing share of customers willing to pay slightly more. And I think we have to get accustomed to the fact that it will be slightly more expensive, simply because we are internalizing the CO2 cost. So in terms of examples, one example that we also discussed quite publicly in I think last year and 2 years ago, we worked closely with the German company Henkel that is making personal care products, home care products, detergents. And they actually transitioned a whole line of their branded products in the supermarkets to a more sustainable variant, which was based on biomass balance products from BASF. So we've actually supplied products on a biomass base with mass balance approach, and they integrated this into their products. And also for them, an interesting development to see how these products are developing in the supermarket compared to other products. So I think they are one of the leading customers in that segment, and we see in many other segments, in many of our target industries, other customers also promoting this to those customers who are actually willing to pay more.
Great, great. Wonderful. Coming back a bit to the energy part, and of course, as energy, of course, this is one of the biggest contributors to CO2 emissions. Can you just open up a bit more about the impact of green hydrogen on production costs and maybe how the customers are also reacting to that? What has been your experience with that?
Okay, maybe a bit to cast a bit wider net around the energy topic. I mean, for us, half of our emissions, scope 1 and 2, is coming from energy. So energy topics are very big. And for us, the first thing we did was look to replace the gray energy, the fossil energy, with renewables. That's why you see also BASF investing into wind farms, into solar parks, and into energy storage, to basically shift away from the use of natural gas to generate electricity and steam for the production. So this is a huge, huge lever. But we realized that the use of electricity and even electrification has certain limits, and there are applications where we think we will need hydrogen. Even today, BASF uses about 1 million tons of hydrogen globally, so it's a large product and also associated with a significant share of CO2 emissions as well. So finding CO2-free or low-carbon alternatives to the traditional way of making hydrogen is very important. Green hydrogen is one of the options. And the cost of green hydrogen, of course, is not only linked to the cost of electrolyzers, but very strongly linked to the cost of electricity. And there, if you take the prices that we expect in Europe, green hydrogen is actually fairly expensive compared to the current fossil sources. So we are looking in different ways. The first one is looking at different technologies. This also includes blue hydrogen, so basically with carbon capture and storage, turquoise hydrogen with methane pyrolysis, which generates solid carbon, and that can be then disposed of, but actually to avoid the CO2 emissions, or even importing hydrogen or some of the equivalents to especially our European production sites, because we believe that Europe today is importing energy from overseas, and even with the transition and even with expanding all the renewables and other forms of energy generation that we have in Europe, we will still be an energy importing region in the future. So we have to also, as a chemical company with a strong base in Europe, look at importing energy. So in all of this sort of discussion around the different sources of energy, hydrogen is an important one. We will need it. Today, green hydrogen is, first of all, rather expensive compared to what we have. And then this also translates into higher costs for the downstream product, which brings us back to the willingness to pay topic. But it is also a regulation topic in Europe. There has been quite a strong regulation around mandating, or proposals regulation mandating the use of green hydrogen in certain industry sectors like renewables fuels or sustainable aviation fuels. And there are now, with the Renewable Energy Directive 3, more regulations aimed at mandating the percentages of green hydrogen in production. Now, unfortunately, I think the regulation was well intended to help create a market for hydrogen. The way it actually works for us, it kind of hinders us to make decisions on hydrogen projects, because we actually, first of all, don't know exactly how the regulation will pan out. We see significantly higher costs to what our competitors in other regions are dealing with. And with all the insecurity, it actually kind of makes it harder to make a decision on hydrogen projects. So right now, we are basically evaluating many projects. We have some specific ideas. We are piloting different technologies. So we built a 54 megawatt electrolyzer in Ludwigshafen at our main site. We have a pilot plant for methane pyrolysis running. We're exploring projects for blue hydrogen. So all of these things are ongoing. But to really decide and make a larger bet on green hydrogen, I think we need to bring the costs down, number one, and then we need to have a very stable regulatory environment that we know if we make an investment, what kind of regulation will we have in 10, 15 years, and will the investment actually pay off? So I think green hydrogen is a rather complex topic right now for us.
Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. And that's great that we are touching base a bit more on the regulation and the financing as well. So of course, the regulation is a big topic right now. Let's talk a bit more also about the financing. So what do you feel like would be the role of the external financing to support those type of projects at a larger scale, for example, at BASF? What has been your experience, and what do you think the role of those financing, external financing specifically?
I think, first of all, that fundamentally it's very important, because the overall transition and really changing within a few decades the asset base of many industries requires a lot of money, and it's usually more than what companies can generate as a free cash flow. So there is a huge demand for financing. The second topic is more a strategic one. If I look at, for instance, our portfolio as a chemical company, there are certain investments that wouldn't really fit into the core portfolio of a chemical company, but it still have to be made. One example, for instance, would be pipelines. We will need, for this transition, we will need a lot of infrastructure, CO2 pipelines, hydrogen pipelines, maybe other pipelines. And these will be essential to connect the industrial bases in Europe, especially, but also in other regions that are there. Now, these need to be built. And of course, we will be a significant user of that. But if I look from a perspective of a shareholder that has invested into a chemical company, does that shareholder really want us to put our money into a pipeline? Maybe not. So there are certain, I would say, especially infrastructure investments where financing from third parties would be not only welcome, but actually make a lot of sense. The other aspect is that in terms of the risk profile, some of those investments actually come with a risk profile that are perfectly suited for instance, pension funds and so forth. So people that are looking to put money into long-term investments with a stable return. So some of the projects that we have actually fit that profile. And then it makes financially a lot more sense to basically use that money instead of using our own capex and then reserving that capex to build chemical plants for further growth or for more sustainable products. So I think there's a huge role. There's a need in the industry for the financing, and I mean, in terms of asset or capital allocation, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and we just right now seen that in Germany specifically, there will be a large project starting on repurposing, for example, some of the pipelines from the
Right.
from the gas to the
Yes.
hydrogen. So that's a big step forward for sure.
Yeah, and that exactly would be a perfect example. I mean, this will require a lot of money. Would it make sense for BASF to invest into the core grid? Probably not, but there is money available. And of course, there will be a return paid on this, but this makes a lot more sense to do it in that way. And we also, if you look at our own investments, the first wind park that we invested in the North Sea, together with Vattenfall, we also had basically an investor come on board and take over some of the capital. Again, this makes a lot of sense for them. It makes a lot of sense for us. So classical win-win. I think so the financial industry has a big role to play in driving the transition and putting up the capital to help companies transform.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Going forward towards let's say, your aspirations for the net zero accelerator, where do you see the program going next at BASF? Like, what would be some of the milestones that you and your team are aiming at?
I mean, if I go back to the name, the reason we called the program or this division in BASF Net Zero Accelerator is because we wanted to accelerate the development of the whole company. When we started, we had the feeling that there was a lot of activities going on in the company, but we're not gaining enough traction, we're not fast enough. So we wanted to be at the forefront of the industry transformation, basically be an early adopter of things and really drive change. But we felt a large, complex organization like BASF, it's difficult to make that happen. So that's why this program, this project to accelerate the entire company. Now, I think this is an effort that has a certain time limit because at some point the company is accelerating. And we see already now, if I compare this to 3 years ago, in many of our business units, our operating divisions, the topics that were a bit more remote 3 years ago are in the core of the discussion. There are many more discussions with customers about sustainable products than there were 3 years ago. There are more projects. So this acceleration, from my view, has worked very well. And we also, on the renewable energy side, 3 years ago, we started building a separate company for BASF to invest in wind park projects and solar farms. And this company has also taken off very well. So there are many milestones that we set that have been achieved. So I think what we will do is we will eventually transition our project into an ongoing organization integrated into the businesses. So because the idea is not to build up a sort of green BASF next to a fossil BASF, but the idea is to help all the business units really transform to a more sustainable version. Yeah, and green I use sort of with quotes, knowing that there are all sorts of regulations around the term, which terms to use. So the idea eventually is that this accelerator is a temporary division, and that eventually will become dissolved and all the activities be transformed into operating divisions. So that's the idea. And I think so. What we will do now is basically look activity by activity, which ones are ready, and are we really globally accelerating fast enough? I mean, there's also a big difference between the different regions, how fast our teams and then also our customers are adopting. And in the end, what we are really expecting is that as sustainability becomes more and more of a topic in all markets, that this whole topic will not be needing an acceleration or a unit that drives it, but there will be a huge market pull. I mean, we see this already increasing in Europe. We talked about it in the very beginning with more and more customers asking, and I think this is happening globally. So eventually, it will not need somebody like me to say, well, we have to do this and driving projects, because all the customers will be asking for it, and then things will happen by itself. So I think this is the sort of from a driving approach to a market pull. This is where I see this going long term.
Wonderful. Maybe just to follow up on overall, so of course your division is collaborating with other teams as well. So what has been kind of the approach to promote and accelerate also the adoption of those new technologies, for example? And have you seen, or how do you manage the change as well in the organization?
Okay, there are a couple of interesting dimensions of the change that I also experienced over the last years. One is that if I look historically at our company, there was I would say people are very proud of the ability to develop technologies in-house, build plans in-house, basically develop everything in-house, and then bring very innovative new things to the market. So this is somehow in the core of the company. With this transformation, what we see is that this is still true to a certain point, but there are many things that only work in partnerships. I'm going to give you an example. Traditionally, at the largest site in Germany, we have power plants on site. Now, with the wind park, the power plant is 1,000 kilometers away. So you need to not only collaborate with the partners that are investing there, but you also need to have partnerships with basically to organize the transmission of power. So you need to have a much more involvement there. In the area of chemical recycling, we are developing own technologies, but we also invested in startup companies because they had very interesting technologies that we wanted to help scale. Again, an approach that in the past we hadn't pursued so much. So it requires a cultural shift. It's quite a change actually for people to go from an approach of doing everything by yourself to opening up and also sharing some of the topics. The next thing is that we realized also we want this transformation to be really, really fast. If you think about how long the industry was running basically on oil and gas for the last, 80 years or something. And now we're trying to transition to net zero in the matter of 2-3 decades. So it's a very fast transition. So we need to pick up speed. And bringing a new technology to the market historically has taken some time, and sometimes it took 10-15 years to bring it to the market, or even longer. So in order to accelerate, we also said that we need to also here, even in the technology development phase, create partnerships. So one of the things we're looking at, or one of the big technologies for us, is steam cracking to produce the olefins that almost all the chemistry is built on, which is also a highly CO2 emitting technology. So we started on a project to electrify steam cracking, and realized, well, we are very well underway, but it'll take some time. And then realized we have 2 other companies that are looking into the same topic, this Linde and Sabic, and eventually the CEOs got together and said, well, wouldn't it be better if we all pooled our IP, we pooled our knowledge and our experience, and we try to do this together. And then that's now a joint project where a pilot plant is running and the 3 companies are developing it, and we believe that we can have this commercially ready by 2030. So much, much faster than we would have traditionally done this. So again, a cultural approach, of course, in the past, you would have basically protected all the IP, built high walls around it, not talk to anybody, just to develop everything in-house until you're ready. And now you open up early to share with others and to become faster. So that's a bit of a cultural shift and quite a change management. The third element that I see is in terms of how people approached topics. I mean, in the chemical industry, one of the things that's super important is safety. So you need to do things safely. So before you do something, you need to double check that you're really doing it properly. Every plant has high safety standards. The people are trained to look for risks and to do everything to make sure production is safe. So of course, the safety culture and this culture of avoiding risks is very important. It is also what makes us a reliable supplier. But when you're trying to transform, there's a lot of risks in these projects that we cannot really manage very well. We can try to understand them, but we cannot let risks that if we identify them, completely stop us. And I think this is a bit of a topic that instead of saying, oh, wait, there's a risk, we have to revise everything because we need to avoid this, which makes sense in a production environment. When we're trying to drive a transformation, we can't really completely avoid risks. So we have to deal with them differently, which again, there's a change aspect. How do you deal with risks? How do you actually make projects work where you cannot foresee exactly what the year 2035 will look like? So there's many change aspects and around how people internally work and how we have to work in partnerships that have been a very interesting aspect of my work to help an organization move in that direction.
Wonderful. Great. And maybe just to conclude, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to another companies, be it in chemical industry or any other industries as well, to accelerate the journey towards the net zero? What worked the best for you and your team?
I would say the topic needs to be owned or adopted or fully supported from the very top of the company. You need to have basically a CEO fully behind something like this, say, I want this. For a simple reason. I mean, first of all, the CEO always sets the tone in the company and everybody understands what is really the priority. So if this is a priority for the CEO, it kind of trickles down in the organization. But also in very practical terms, when you're doing something like this, there will be trade-offs that you have to make. There will be decisions that come to down to, do we do this, yes or no? And not in all cases is an organization able to work it out. So some of these things will eventually boil up to a CEO who has to take the call, am I going to do this or not? I mean, also in my role, I was able to do a lot of things, and there was a lot of things that I could basically push forward. But there have been instances where basically it came down to a CEO call saying, this is what I want to do. This is the direction the company is on. So without the support from the top level of the company, it's not possible to get this done, because people will get stuck in figuring out how to make the right trade-offs. So I think that's my advice. You're going to have to make trade-offs, and then the support from the very top, or the commitment from the very top, is key.
Yeah, great. Lars, thank you so much for the podcast. I think that was very good insights that we were able to capture in a short while, but I think it was dense with great insights and ideas. So really, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you on our podcast.
Thank you, Christina. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.